The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Music Academy, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. Today was different from any other day at the prestigious school. It was the annual Spring Showcase, an event that brought together the finest young musicians from across the city. Parents arrived in expensive cars, their children dressed in crisp uniforms and carrying instrument cases that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Inside the grand auditorium, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Mothers adjusted their children's bow ties and smoothed down wrinkled dresses. Fathers checked their phones, making sure the cameras were ready to capture every perfect note their little prodigies would play. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air, arranged in elegant bouquets that decorated the stage. At the center of it all stood a magnificent grand piano. Its black surface gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the crystal chandeliers hanging above. This wasn't just any piano, it was a Steinway worth more than most people's houses. The Academy had saved for years to buy it, and today it would showcase the talents of their most gifted students. The auditorium seats filled quickly with well-dressed families. Women wore pearls and designer handbags, while men adjusted their expensive watches and talked quietly about business deals. Their children, the stars of today's show, warmed up backstage with private tutors who charged hundreds of dollars per hour. These kids had been playing piano since they could barely walk, their tiny fingers guided by the best teachers money could buy. In the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a young girl with her grandmother. The girl's name was Lily, and she looked completely out of place in this world of luxury. Her dress was clean but obviously secondhand, with small flowers printed on faded blue fabric. Her shoes had been polished until they shined, but anyone could see they had been worn by someone else before her. Her grandmother wore her best outfit, a simple black dress she had owned for 20 years, paired with a small handbag that had seen better days. Lily's eyes were wide as she took in everything around her. She had never been in a place so fancy before. The ceiling seemed to stretch up forever, decorated with beautiful paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. The seats were covered in soft red velvet, so different from the plastic chairs at her school. Everything sparkled and gleamed, making her feel like she had stepped into a fairy tale. Her grandmother, Mrs. Chun, worked as a cleaner at the academy. She had been scrubbing floors and washing windows here for 15 years, always staying invisible, always working quietly in the background. Today was her day off, but she had received a special invitation from Dr. Harrison, the school's director. He had noticed how Lily always waited patiently in the hallway after school, doing her homework on the floor while her grandmother finished her cleaning duties. "You should bring your granddaughter to our showcase," Dr. Harrison had said kindly. "Music should be for everyone, not just those who can afford our tuition." Mrs. Chung had been so grateful for his kindness. She knew Lily loved music more than anything in the world, even though they could never afford proper lessons. As they sat in their seats, Lily watched the other children with fascination. She noticed how confident they looked, how they carried themselves like they owned the place. Their parents spoke in hushed tones about conservatories and competitions, using words Lily didn't understand but somehow knew were important. These kids lived in a world where music lessons were as normal as eating breakfast, where talent was nurtured with the best teachers and the finest instruments. The program in Lily's hands listed name after name of students she had never heard of. Next to each name was a list of achievements that made her head spin: first place at regional competitions, acceptance into summer programs at famous music schools, performances with professional orchestras. She wondered what it would feel like to have your name printed on such beautiful paper, to have your accomplishments listed for everyone to see. Mrs. Chun squeezed her granddaughter's hand gently. She knew what Lily was thinking because she was thinking the same thing. They didn't belong here, not really. They were guests in a world that operated by different rules, where money could buy the kind of opportunities that Lily could only dream about. But Mrs. Chun also knew something these wealthy families didn't know. Her granddaughter had something special, something that couldn't be bought or taught. Every evening, after finishing her homework at the kitchen table, Lily would watch piano videos on their old tablet, The screen was cracked and the sound was tinny, but she absorbed every lesson like a sponge. She would practice on a paper keyboard she had drawn herself, her fingers moving silently across the drawn keys while she hummed the melodies in her head. Sometimes when Mrs. Cheen worked late at the academy, Lily would sneak peeks at the practice rooms, watching through the small windows as students played pieces that made her heart race with excitement. The lights began to dim, and a hush fell. Over the audience, Dr. Harrison walked onto the stage, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet auditorium. He was a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than Mrs. Chun made in a month. He smiled warmly at the audience and began to speak about the importance of music education, about nurturing young talent, about the bright futures that awaited these gifted children. Lily listened to every word, but her eyes kept drifting to the piano. From where she sat, it looked enormous, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake up. She imagined what it would feel like to sit on that bench, to press those keys and hear real music pour out instead of the silence of her paper keyboard. The thought made her stomach flutter with a mixture of excitement and longing. The first student took the stage to thunderous applause from his family section. He was a boy about Lily's age, wearing a perfect black suit with a bow tie that probably cost more than her entire outfit. He played a complex piece by batch, his fingers dancing across the keys with mechanical precision. The audience clapped politely when he finished, and he bowed formally before walking off stage with practiced confidence. One by one, more students performed. Each piece was technically perfect, each performance polished to a shine by months of expensive instruction. The parents beamed with pride, taking photos and videos to share with friends and family. These children were living proof of what money and privilege could accomplish, their talents carefully cultivated and displayed like precious jewels. But as Lily watched and listened, she felt something growing inside her chest. It wasn't jealousy. Exactly, though she certainly wished she could have lessons like these kids. It was more like hunger, a deep, aching need to touch those keys herself, to see if the music in her head could become real. She had so much music trapped inside her, melodies that played in her dreams and rhythms that matched her heartbeat. If only she could let it out. If only she could show everyone that music wasn't just about expensive lessons and perfect technique. The showcase continued, and Lily found herself memorizing every piece, every movement of the performer's hands. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few hours, she would get her chance to prove that music truly was for everyone, and she would change everything. The first half of the showcase had ended, and Dr. Harrison announced a 15-minute intermission. The auditorium lights came up, and suddenly the quiet, reverent atmosphere transformed into a bustling social gathering. Parents stood up, stretching their legs and immediately pulling out their phones to share videos of their children's performances. The sound of conversations filled the air as families congratulated each other and discussed the impressive talent they had just witnessed. Lily watched as the performers emerged from backstage, still in their formal concert attire. They moved through the crowd like celebrities, accepting praise and compliments from adults who seemed genuinely amazed by their skills. She noticed how comfortable these kids looked receiving attention, how they smiled and nodded graciously when people told them how wonderful they were. It was like they had been born for this kind of recognition. Mrs. Chun stood up slowly, her old knees creaking slightly after sitting for so long. She looked down at her granddaughter with a gentle smile. "I'm going to get us some water from the lobby," she said, patting Lily's shoulder. "These fancy events always make me thirsty. You stay here and rest your legs, sweetheart. I'll be right back." Lily nodded, settling deeper into her velvet seat. She was actually grateful for a moment alone. The intensity of watching all those performances had left her feeling overwhelmed and slightly dizzy. All that beautiful music, all those confident young faces, all that applause, it was like being in a dream where everyone spoke a language she understood but had never been allowed to use herself. As the crowd thinned out, with many people heading to the lobby for refreshments and bathroom breaks, Lily found herself with a clearer view of the stage. The magnificent piano sat there in the soft stage lights, looking somehow both inviting and intimidating. During The performances, it had seemed like a magical creature, responding to each touch with sounds that ranged from whisper-soft to thunderously powerful. Now, in the relative quiet, it looked almost lonely. Without really planning to, Lily stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but something was pulling her forward. She told herself she just wanted a closer look, just wanted to see the piano from a better angle. Her grandmother had said to stay in her seat, but surely there was no harm in walking down a few rows to get a better view. The ushers had stepped out, and most of the audience was in the lobby. No one would even notice her. Step by step, she made her way down the aisle. The carpet was so thick her footsteps made no sound. Each row she passed brought her closer to the stage, and with each step her heart beat a little faster. She had seen pianos before, of course. There was an old upright in the music room at her school, though it was missing several keys and hadn't been tuned in years. But this instrument was something entirely different. It was like comparing a bicycle to a race car. When she reached the front row, Lily stopped and stared. From this close, she could see every detail of the piano's construction. The wood grain swirled in beautiful patterns across its surface. The keys were so perfectly white and black, not yellowed or chipped like the ones at school. She could even see her reflection in the glossy finish. A small girl in a simple dress looking back at herself with wide, wonder-filled eyes. The stage was only a few feet away now, separated by a small orchestra pit. During the performances, this distance had seemed huge, like an ocean between the audience and the performers. But now, with no one watching, it looked surprisingly manageable. Just a few steps, really. Just a small gap between where she was and where the music lived. Lily looked around nervously. The auditorium was almost empty now. She could hear the distant sound of conversations and laughter from the lobby, but here in the main hall, she was practically alone. The cleaning staff wouldn't start until after the showcase ended. The performers were probably in the green room, being congratulated by their teachers. Even the stage crew had stepped away for their break. Her hands were trembling now, as she clasped them together to try to steady them. Every logical part of her brain was telling her to go back to her seat, to wait for her grandmother, to be the good, quiet girl she had always been. But there was another voice, deeper and more insistent, that whispered about dreams and chances and moments that might never come again. She had been dreaming about touching a real piano for as long as she could remember. Every night she fell asleep imagining what it would feel like to press down on those keys and hear actual music emerge. She had watched so many videos, studied so many finger positions, memorized so many pieces. But it had all been theoretical, like studying swimming without ever touching water. The small set of steps leading up to the stage seemed to glow in the soft lighting. Lily's feet moved almost without her permission, carrying her forward until she was standing at the bottom step. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it and come running. But the auditorium remained quiet except for the distant murmur of intermission conversations. One step. Her foot touched the first stair as she felt like she was crossing into forbidden territory. This stage was meant for the chosen ones, the students who belonged here, who had earned their right to stand in this sacred space through years of expensive lessons and prestigious competitions. 2 steps. Now she was halfway up, and there was no pretending this was just curiosity anymore. She was actually doing this. She was actually climbing onto the stage where, just minutes ago, some of the most talented young musicians in the city had performed for an audience of hundreds. 3 steps, and she was on the stage itself. The feeling was incredible and terrifying. At the same time, the lights were brighter here, warmer. She could see the entire auditorium spread out before her, all those empty seats that had been filled with people who belonged in this world of classical music and cultural refinement. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to have all those seats filled with people who had come specifically to hear her play. The piano bench sat just a few feet away now. It was a simple black bench, padded with leather that looked soft and comfortable. During the performances, she had watched student after student approach this bench with confidence, sitting down like they had done it 1,000 times before. Because they probably had. In practice rooms and recital halls and competition venues across the country, Lily's legs felt like jelly as she walked those final steps. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. The piano keys gleamed under the stage lights, and she could smell the faint scent of wood polish and the lingering perfume from the previous performers. Her reflection wavered in the piano's polished surface, making her look ghostly and unreal. She was close enough now to reach out and touch it, close enough to finally answer the question that had been burning inside her for years. What would it really feel like to play a piano like this? What would her music sound like when it came from an instrument that could respond to every subtle touch, every gentle pressure, every emotional nuance she had been storing up inside her heart? Her hand trembled as she reached forward, and in that moment, everything changed forever. Lily's finger made contact with middle C, and the single note rang out clear and pure in the empty auditorium. The sound was more beautiful than anything she had ever heard before. It wasn't like the dull, mechanical sound of the old piano at school or the tinny audio from her cracked tablet. This was music in its purest form, rich and warm and alive. For a moment she forgot where she was. She forgot about her second-hand dress and her nervous stomach and the fact that she absolutely did not belong on this stage. All that existed was the connection between her finger and this incredible instrument. She pressed another key then. Another, marveling at how responsive the piano was to even the gentlest touch. Then she heard the voices. "Oh my goodness, look at that!" The sharp whisper came from somewhere behind her. Lily's blood turned to ice as she realized that people were returning from intermission. She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs, and saw a small group of students standing at the edge of the stage area. They were still in their performance clothes, looking like they had just come from the green room where the performers had been receiving congratulations. The girl who had spoken was tall and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a black velvet dress that probably cost more than Mrs. Chun made in a week. Her name was Victoria, though Lily didn't know that yet. Victoria was one of the Academy star students, the kind of prodigy who had been featured in the local newspaper for winning a statewide competition. When she was only 10 years old, "What is she doing up there?" Victoria asked, not bothering to lower her voice anymore. Her tone was a mixture of shock and disgust, like she had discovered something dirty in a place that was supposed to be clean to another student. A boy with slicked back dark hair wearing an expensive stepped closer to get a better look. His name was Preston, and his parents had donated enough money to the academy to have a practice room named after their family. "I have no idea," he said, shaking his head. "Does she even go to school here? I've never seen her before." More students began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They formed a small crowd at the foot of the stage, all staring up at Lily like she was some kind of strange exhibit in a museum. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion, amusement, and barely concealed horror that someone like her would dare to touch their precious piano. "Look at her dress," whispered a girl with red hair tied back in a perfect bun. "It looks like something from a thrift store." "And those shoes?" added another, pointing at Lily's carefully polished but obviously old footwear. "They're not even the right kind for a performance." Lily wanted to disappear. She wanted to melt into the stage floor or somehow become invisible. Her face burned with embarrassment as she realized how foolish she must look to these polished, perfect students. She was a fake, a pretender, someone who had no business being in their world, but she couldn't move. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, and her hands remained frozen on the piano keys. She opened her mouth to try to explain herself, to apologize, but no words came out. She just stood there, trapped in the spotlight of their judgment. "Somebody should tell her this isn't a toy," Victoria said, her voice getting louder and more confident as more students joined the group. "This is a professional instrument. It's worth more than most people's cars." Preston laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the air like glass. "Maybe she thinks this is some kind of museum where you can touch everything. Someone should explain to her that this is a serious institution." The group was growing larger now. Word was spreading through the returning audience that something unusual was happening on stage. Parents began to notice the commotion and started moving closer to see what was going on. Some pulled out their phones, thinking they might capture something interesting or amusing to share later. "How did she even get in here?" asked another student, a petite girl whose diamond earrings caught the stage lights. "Don't you need an invitation? Security is usually pretty tight for these events." "Maybe she snuck in," suggested Preston, warming to the idea. "Maybe she's some kind of piano groupie who goes around trying to play instruments that don't belong to her." The laughter that followed was cruel and sharp. It started with just a few giggles, but it spread through the group like wildfire. Soon, a dozen students were laughing at the sight of this obviously out-of-place girl standing frozen at their precious piano. "Someone should get a teacher," Victoria said, though she made no move to do so herself. She was enjoying this too much. It felt good to be part of the group pointing out someone else's mistake, someone else's failure to understand the rules of their world. More adults were noticing now. Lily could see them out of the corner of her eye, well-dressed parents whispering to each other and pointing in her direction. Their expressions ranged from confused to annoyed to openly disapproving. She could practically hear their thoughts. "Who is this child? Why is she touching our children's piano? Where are her parents? How did security let this happen?" "I bet she can't even play," said another boy, his voice dripping with contempt. "She probably doesn't even know what those keys are for. She just saw something shiny and decided to touch it." "Like a little kid in a candy store," agreed Victoria. "Except she's too old to use that excuse. She should know better." The shame was overwhelming now. Lily felt like she was drowning in it, like the weight of their judgment was pressing down on her chest and making it hard to breathe. Every insecurity she had ever felt about her clothes, her background, her family's financial situation came rushing back at once. She was exactly what they thought she was, a poor girl who didn't belong. Someone who had wandered into the wrong place and made a fool of herself. But underneath the shame, something else was beginning to stir. It was small at first, just a tiny spark of anger at the unfairness of it all. Why should her love of music matter less than theirs just because her family couldn't afford expensive lessons? Why should she be laughed at for dreaming, for wanting to touch something beautiful? The laughter was getting louder now, and more people were joining in. Even some of the adults were starting to smile, finding humor in the situation of this clearly overwhelmed child who had somehow ended up where she didn't belong. "Maybe we should start selling tickets to watch random people try to play," Preston joked, and the group erupted in fresh laughter. Lily's hands were still on the keys, and she could feel the piano waiting beneath her fingers. All those hours of practice on her paper keyboard, all those nights falling asleep to YouTube videos of beautiful music, all those dreams of someday, somehow, getting to play a real piano. Was she really going to let their laughter stop her? Was she going to walk away without even trying? The moment stretched on, filled with cruel laughter and whispered comments. But deep inside Lily, something was changing. The little spark of anger was growing stronger, feeding on all the music she had kept locked inside her heart. Soon, very soon, she would have to make a choice that would change everything. The laughter echoed through the auditorium like thunder, and Lily felt each sound hit her like a physical blow. Her cheeks burned with such intense heat that she thought they might actually catch fire. The group of students below the stage had grown larger, and now their parents were joining in, shaking their heads and whispering among themselves with disapproving looks. "This is embarrassing," Victoria said loudly, making sure her voice carried. "Someone needs to tell her that this isn't a public playground. These instruments are for serious musicians only." A woman in an expensive fur coat pointed at Lily with her manicured finger. "Whose child is that? She clearly doesn't understand how these events work. This is highly inappropriate." "Maybe she's confused," said a man wearing a gold watch that probably cost more than Mrs. Chung's yearly salary. "She might think this is some kind of open house where anyone can just walk up and touch things." The comments kept coming, each one worse than the last. Lily heard every word, and each one felt like a tiny knife cutting away at her confidence. She had never felt so small, so out of place, so completely wrong in her entire life. Her hands trembled on the piano keys, and she could feel tears starting to build behind her eyes. "Look, she's shaking," Preston pointed out with a cruel laugh. "She knows she's been caught doing something she shouldn't be doing." "I'd bet she can't even read music," added another student, a girl with perfect curls and a dress that looked like it came from a magazine. She probably just saw other people playing and thought it looked easy. The crowd was getting more confident now, feeding off each other's cruel energy. What had started as shocked whispers was turning into open mockery. Some of the younger students were giggling behind their hands, while the older ones made loud comments designed to humiliate Lily even further. "Someone should ask her what piece she thinks she's going to play," Victoria suggested with fake sweetness. "Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, that seems more her level." The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. Even some of the parents were smiling now, finding humor in what they saw as an amusing situation. To them, this was just a funny story they would tell their friends later about the time some random girl wandered onto the stage at their children's prestigious concert. Lily's vision started to blur as the tears she had been fighting finally began to fall. She felt completely exposed, like everyone in the auditorium could see right through her and judge everything they found lacking. Her dress suddenly felt even more shabby, her shoes even more worn, her entire presence even more wrong. "Oh no, now she's crying," said Preston, but his tone held no sympathy at all. "Maybe next time she think twice before trying to pretend. She belongs somewhere she clearly doesn't." The weight of their judgment was crushing. Lily felt like she was being pressed down by an invisible force that wanted to make her disappear entirely. Every insecurity she had ever had about her family's financial situation, about her lack of formal training, about her dreams that seemed too big for someone like her, all came rushing back at once. A security guard had noticed the commotion and was making his way toward the stage. He looked confused and slightly annoyed, like this was exactly the kind of problem he didn't want to deal with during such an important event. Lily could see him approaching out of the corner of her eye, and she knew that in just a few moments she would be escorted off the stage in front of everyone. "Finally," Victoria said with satisfaction when she spotted the guard, "someone's going to handle this properly." The shame was overwhelming. Lily had never felt so humiliated in her entire life. Part of her wanted to run off the stage before the security guard reached her, to disappear into the crowd and pretend this had never happened. She could find her grandmother in the lobby and they could leave quietly and maybe no one would remember. The girl who had dared to touch the sacred piano, but then, through the haze of her embarrassment and fear, she heard a voice. It wasn't coming from the crowd of mockers below the stage. It was coming from inside her own memory, as clear as if the speaker was standing right next to her. "Music doesn't care about your fancy clothes or your expensive lessons, little star. Music only cares about what's in your heart." It was her grandfather's voice. He had died when she was 8 years old, but she could still remember sitting on his lap while he told her stories about the power of music. He had been a street musician in his younger days, playing guitar on corners for whatever coins people would drop in his case. He never made much money, but he always said that music had made him the richest man in the world. "Don't let anyone tell you that music belongs to only certain people," he had said during one of their last conversations before he got sick. "Music belongs to anyone who loves it enough to let it live in their heart. And you, my little star, have more music in your heart than most people could carry in a lifetime." The memory hit her like a wave, washing away some of the shame and replacing it with something else, something stronger. Something that had been growing inside her for years, fed by countless hours of practicing on paper keys and dreaming of moments just like this one. The laughter continued, but it seemed more distant now. The cruel comments kept coming, but they felt less sharp, less able to cut through the protective shell that was forming around her heart. The security guard was getting closer, but instead of panic, Lily felt a strange sense of calm beginning to settle over her. Her grandfather had been right. Music didn't care about her second-hand dress or her worn shoes or the fact that she had never had a proper lesson. Music cared about the melodies that played in her dreams, the rhythms that matched her heartbeat, the emotions that she had been storing up inside her soul for years with no way to let them out. Until now, her hands were still on the keys, and she could feel the piano waiting beneath her fingers like a sleeping giant ready to wake up. All those nights of practice, all those hours of watching videos and memorizing finger positions, all those dreams of someday getting to play a real piano, it had all led to this moment. The crowd was expecting her to run away in shame. They were waiting for her to prove them right, to show that she was exactly what they thought she was, a poor girl who didn't understand her place in the world. The security guard was almost at the stage now, ready to remove her like an unwanted distraction from their perfect, polished event, but something was changing inside Lily. The little spark of anger that had started when the laughter began was growing stronger, fed by her grandfather's words and her own deep love of music. She thought about all the hours she had spent dreaming of this moment, all the sacrifices her grandmother had made, all the music that was trapped inside her just waiting for a chance to be heard. Maybe she didn't belong in their world of expensive lessons and designer clothes, but music belonged to her just as much as it belonged to them, and she was about to prove it. Lily closed her eyes and took the deepest breath of her life. The laughter around her seemed to fade into the background as her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. She could almost feel his gentle hand on her shoulder, giving her the courage she needed. When she opened her eyes again, something fundamental had changed inside her. The security guard was only a few steps away now, his hand already reaching toward her to escort her off the stage. The students below continued their cruel commentary, waiting for the final humiliation of watching her be removed like an unwanted piece of trash. The parents stood with their arms crossed, shaking their heads at this disruption to their perfect afternoon, but Lily wasn't moving. Instead, she slowly turned back toward the piano and placed both hands properly on the keys. Her fingers found their positions as naturally as if she had been playing this instrument her entire life. Every muscle memory from her countless hours of practice on that paper keyboard suddenly came rushing back. Every melody she had memorized, every technique she had studied, every dream she had nurtured in secret, it all crystallized in this single moment. "What is she doing now?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Is she actually going to try to play something?" The laughter faltered slightly. There was something different about Lily's posture now, something that made the crowd pause. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her back was straight, her shoulders relaxed, her hands positioned with a confidence that seemed to come from nowhere. "She's probably going to make a fool of herself even more," Preston said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Something about the way Lily sat at the bench, the way she held her hands, looked almost professional. The security guard slowed his approach, unsure of what to do. His job was to remove disturbances, but the girl wasn't being disruptive anymore. She was just sitting at the piano like any other performer. He glanced toward the side of the stage. Looking for guidance from the event coordinators, Lily's mind had become perfectly clear. All the noise, all the judgment, all the fear had melted away, leaving only the music. She could hear the piece she wanted to play as clearly as if it was already flowing from the piano. It was Chopin's Minute Waltz, a piece she had watched performed hundreds of times online, a melody that had lived in her heart for so long it felt like part of her own heartbeat. Her grandmother's voice joined her grandfather's in her memory. "You practice more than any child I know," Mrs. Chun had said just last week while watching Lily's fingers move across her paper keyboard. "Someday, when you get your chance, you're going to amaze everyone." That someday was now. The crowd had grown quieter, though not from respect. They were waiting for the spectacle, for the moment when this obviously untrained girl would embarrass herself completely by attempting something far beyond her abilities. Some people even had their phones out, ready to record what they assumed would be a cringe-worthy moment they could share and laugh about later. "This should be interesting," someone whispered from the audience. "I wonder if she even knows where middle C is. Maybe she thinks if she sits there long enough, the music will just happen by itself," another person added, causing a few chuckles. But as Lily's fingers prepared to press the first keys, something magical began to happen. The auditorium, which had been filled with the chaotic energy of mockery and judgment, started to shift. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the room sensed that something important was about to occur. Dr. Harrison had heard the commotion from the lobby and was making his way back into the auditorium. He had been dealing with a small crisis involving a missing music stand, but the unusual noise level had caught his attention. As he entered through the back doors, he saw the crowd gathered around the stage and immediately understood that something was happening. His first instinct was to intervene. Unauthorized people weren't supposed to touch the Steinway, especially not during an official showcase. But something made him pause at the back of the auditorium. Maybe it was the way the girl sat at the bench, or maybe it was the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd, but Dr. Harrison found himself holding back, curious to see what would happen next. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chun had finished getting water from the lobby and was looking for her granddaughter. When she didn't see Lily in their seats, a small panic began to build in her chest. She asked an usher if he had seen a young girl in a blue flowered dress, and he pointed toward the main auditorium with a confused expression. "There's something going on in there," he said. "Some kind of situation with a kid on the stage." Mrs. Chian's heart dropped as she rushed back into the auditorium. When she saw the crowd gathered around the stage and spotted her granddaughter sitting at the piano, she felt like her world was tilting sideways. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, that Lily's love of music would lead her into trouble, into situations where she didn't belong. She started to move toward the stage, ready to apologize profusely and remove Lily before things got worse. But something in her granddaughter's posture made her stop. Lily looked different somehow, calmer, more centered, like she belonged exactly where she was, back on stage. Lily was entering a state of pure focus that she had never experienced before. Every doubt, every fear, every cruel word that had been thrown at her had crystallized into a single, burning determination. She was going to show them that music truly belonged to everyone who loved it enough to let it live in their heart. Her grandfather had been a street musician who never owned anything valuable except his guitar. Her grandmother cleaned floors to make ends meet. They had never had money for lessons or fancy clothes or any of the privileges that surrounded her now. But they had given her something more valuable than any of those things. They had given her the understanding that music was a universal language that spoke from soul to soul. The students below the stage were getting impatient. "Is she going to play or just sit there all day?" Victoria asked loudly. "Maybe she's trying to remember how Twinkle, Twinkle goes," Preston added, causing another round of snickers, but their laughter was becoming more forced now, less confident. There was something unsettling about the way Lily sat so still, so composed, so completely unbothered by their mockery. It was like she had found some inner source of strength that made their words powerless. The security guard had stopped completely now, unsure whether to proceed. Dr. Harrison was slowly making his way down the aisle, but he was moving carefully, as if he sensed that interrupting this moment might be a mistake. And then, in the perfect silence that had finally fallen over the auditorium, Lily's fingers touched the keys and began to play. The first notes of the minute waltz rang out clear and true, and everything changed forever. The first notes that flowed from Lily's fingers were like liquid gold. The opening melody of Chopin's Minute Waltz cascaded through the auditorium with a clarity and precision that made everyone freeze in place. This wasn't the fumbling attempt at music that the crowd had been expecting. This was something extraordinary. Victoria's mocking smile vanished from her face as if someone had flipped a switch. Her mouth fell open slightly as she heard technique that rivaled her own despite years of expensive private lessons. The melody was flowing with the kind of natural musicality that couldn't be bought or taught. It had to come from somewhere deeper. Preston stopped mid-laugh, the sound catching in his throat like he was choking. He had been preparing another cruel comment, but the words died on his lips as he realized what he was hearing. This girl, this nobody in her second-hand dress, was playing with a skill level that put most of the academy's students to shame, the parents who had been shaking their heads. in disapproval, now found themselves leaning forward, straining to hear every note. Their expressions shifted from annoyance to confusion to something approaching awe. The woman in the fur coat actually took a step closer to the stage, her perfectly manicured hand rising unconsciously to her chest. Dr. Harrison stopped, walking entirely. In his 30 years of music education, he had heard thousands of students play this particular piece. It was a standard showcase selection, technically challenging but accessible enough for advanced intermediate players. But he had never heard it played quite like this. There was something raw and honest in Lily's interpretation that made the familiar melody sound completely new. The security guard lowered his hand, which had been reaching toward Lily, to remove her from the stage. He wasn't a musician himself, but even he could tell that something special was happening. His job was to handle disturbances, but this was the opposite of a disturbance. This was magic. Mrs. Chun pressed her hand to her mouth, tears already beginning to flow down her cheeks. She had heard her granddaughter practice on that paper keyboard countless times, had listened to her hum melodies while doing homework or helping with chores, but she had never imagined that all those hours of silent practice had been building towards something like this. The Minute Waltz was a piece that demanded both technical precision and emotional depth. The tempo was challenging, requiring fingers to dance across the keys with lightning speed while maintaining perfect control. But it also required something more intangible, the ability to tell a story through music, to make each note carry meaning beyond just the sound it produced. Lily's fingers moved across the keys like they had been born to be there. Every transition was smooth, every phrase perfectly shaped. Her years of watching online tutorials and memorizing finger positions were paying off in ways she had never dared to imagine. But more than that, she was pouring her entire soul into the music. Each note carried the weight of all her dreams, all her frustrations, all her love for music that had been building up inside her for years with no proper outlet. This was her chance to speak in the language she understood better than any other, to show everyone that passion and dedication could create something beautiful, regardless of background or circumstances. The students who had been laughing at her just moments before now stood in stunned silence. Many of them had played the same piece in competitions and recitals, but they had never heard it performed with such emotional intensity. Lily wasn't just playing the notes, she was living them, breathing them, making them part of her very being. The melody swirled and danced, filled with joy and playfulness, but also touched with something deeper. There was longing in her playing, the sound of dreams deferred but never abandoned. There was determination, the musical equivalent of refusing to give up despite overwhelming odds. And there was pure, unfiltered love for the music itself. A hush had fallen over the entire auditorium that was deeper than simple quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize they are witnessing something they will remember for the rest of their lives. Even the youngest children in the audience seemed to sense that this was a moment that demanded their complete attention. The technical aspects of Lily's performance were flawless. Her tempo was perfect, her dynamics carefully controlled, her phrasing musical and natural. But what truly set her apart was the emotion she brought to every single note. This wasn't just a demonstration of skill, it was a conversation between her heart and the piano, conducted in a language that everyone could understand even if they couldn't speak it themselves. Victoria found herself analyzing Lily's technique with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The girl's hand position was textbook perfect. Her fingering choices were intelligent and efficient, and her use of the sustain pedal showed an understanding of the instrument that typically took years to develop. How was this possible? Where had she learned to play like this? The waltz continued to unfold, each section building on the last. Lily navigated the challenging middle section with ease, her left hand providing a solid foundation while her right hand spun out the intricate melody lines. The part that gave many students trouble, the rapid-fire passages that required absolute precision, flowed from her fingers. Like water. Dr. Harrison was mentally revising everything he thought he knew about musical education. Here was proof that formal training, while valuable, wasn't the only path to excellence. This girl had somehow taught herself to play at a level that many of his tuition-paying students would never reach. Despite years of professional instruction, the parents in the audience were having their own revelations. Many of them had spent thousands of dollars on their children's musical education, driving to lessons and competitions, hiring the best teachers money could buy. Yet here was a child who had clearly achieved remarkable results through pure determination and self-directed learning. As the piece moved toward its climactic sections, Lily's playing became even more expressive. She wasn't just executing the notes on the page, she was reimagining them, making them her own. The familiar waltz was being transformed into something personal and unique, a musical autobiography told in three-quarter time, the sound of the Steinway piano under her fingers. Was everything she had dreamed it would be and more? Every subtle touch was translated into sound with perfect clarity. The instrument responded to her emotions as if it could read her mind, producing tones that ranged from whisper-soft to brilliantly powerful depending on what the music demanded. Mrs. Chen watched her granddaughter with wonder and pride swelling in her chest. This was the same little girl who helped her fold laundry while humming melodies, who practiced finger exercises on the kitchen table while waiting for dinner. But now she was transformed, elevated by the music into something magnificent and powerful. The waltz was nearing its conclusion, and Lily could feel the audience holding its collective breath. Every person in that auditorium was completely captivated, drawn into the spell she was weaving with her music. The cruel laughter had been replaced by something far more valuable, genuine respect and admiration. As she prepared to play the final phrases, Lily knew that her life was about to change forever, but in this moment none of that mattered. All that existed was the music, flowing through her and around her like a river of pure joy. The final notes of the minute waltz hung in the air like precious jewels, each one crystal clear and perfect. Lily's hands slowly lifted from the keys, and for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, the entire auditorium existed in complete and absolute silence. It wasn't the awkward quiet that comes when something goes wrong. It was the profound silence that follows something, so beautiful it leaves people breathless. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence was so deep that Lily could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She sat perfectly still on the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly now that the music had ended. The spell that had protected her during the performance was beginning to fade, and she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes staring at her. Victoria stood frozen at the foot of the stage, her face pale with shock. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she had just heard. This girl, this nobody in a thrift store dress, had just delivered one of the most beautiful performances Victoria had ever witnessed. It was technically flawless, emotionally moving, and filled with a natural musicality that Victoria had spent years trying to achieve through expensive lessons. Preston's mouth was hanging open in a way that would have been comical under different circumstances. He had been preparing to laugh at what he assumed would be an embarrassing disaster. Instead, he had just heard playing that was better than his own. Despite years of private instruction with some of the city's most respected teachers, his entire understanding of how musical talent worked was crumbling around him. Dr. Harrison felt like he was seeing music education in a completely new light. In 3 decades of teaching and administration, he had never encountered a student who had achieved this level of excellence through self-directed learning. Every assumption he had made about the necessity of formal training, expensive instruments, and structured curriculum was being challenged by what he had just witnessed. The man in the expensive suit who had been making cruel comments about Lily's appearance now looked deeply uncomfortable. His gold watch suddenly felt heavy on his wrist, and his perfectly tailored clothes seemed somehow less important. He had just learned something profound about the difference between having money and having talent, and the lesson wasn't sitting well with him. Mrs. Chen was crying openly now, tears of joy and pride streaming down her face. She thought about all the nights she had found Lily practicing on that paper keyboard, all the time she had worried that her granddaughter's dreams were too big for their circumstances. Seeing Lily up there, commanding the attention and respect of this entire auditorium felt like watching a miracle unfold. The silence stretched on, growing more powerful with each passing second. It was as if the entire room was trying to process what they had just experienced to understand how their expectations had been so completely shattered. The girl they had been mocking just minutes before had delivered a performance that would have been impressive coming from any of the Academy's star students. Slowly, very slowly, people began to realize that they needed to respond somehow. But what do you say when someone has just turned your entire worldview upside down? How do you react when you've been proven so spectacularly wrong about something you were absolutely certain of? The first person to move was a small girl in the front row, probably around 6 years old. She had been sitting perfectly still throughout Lily's performance, her eyes wide with wonder. Now she began to clap, her small hands making tiny sounds that seemed enormous in the profound quiet. The sound of her applause was like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the auditorium. One by one, other people began to join in. First it was just a few scattered claps, tentative and uncertain. Then more people joined, and more, until the sound began to build into something larger. Dr. Harrison was the first adult to truly understand what he had witnessed. As an educator and musician, he recognized not just the technical skill Lily had displayed, but the deeper implications of her performance. Here was a child who had somehow acquired conservatory-level abilities through sheer determination and love of music. It was exactly the kind of student he had spent his entire career hoping to discover. He began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. His applause was deliberate and respectful, the kind of recognition one professional musician gives to another. Seeing their director applaud seemed to give other people permission to express their own amazement. Victoria found herself clapping almost against her will. Part of her was still struggling with jealousy and confusion, but a larger part was genuinely moved by what she had heard. She had spent years perfecting her technique, but she had rarely felt the kind of emotional connection to music that had poured out of Lily's performance. The woman in the fur coat was applauding too, her diamond rings catching the light as her hands moved together. She felt ashamed of her earlier judgment and comments. She had been so quick to assume that appearance and background determined worth, and she had been proven dramatically wrong. Preston started clapping reluctantly, his face red with embarrassment. He was thinking about all the cruel things he had said, all the assumptions he had made about this girl based on her clothes and her obvious unfamiliarity with their social circle. He had been so certain that formal training and expensive lessons were the only path to musical excellence. The applause was growing stronger now, spreading through the auditorium like wildfire. Parents who had been shaking their heads in disapproval were now clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Students who had been laughing cruelly were applauding with respect and amazement. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Mrs. Chun was clapping. Through her tears, her heart so full of pride and joy that she thought it might burst. She was thinking about her husband, Lily's grandfather, wishing he could have been there to see this moment. He had always believed in Lily's musical gifts. Even when she was just a small child humming along to the radio, the security guard was clapping too, a big smile spreading across his face. He had been prepared to remove what he thought was a disruptive child, but instead he had witnessed something magical. He made a mental note to tell his own daughter about this when he got home, about the power of following your dreams even when others try to discourage you. The applause continued to build, becoming warmer and more enthusiastic with each passing moment. People were beginning to stand up, one by one, until entire rows were on their feet. What had started as reluctant, confused clapping was transforming into a genuine standing ovation. Lily sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. The same people who had been laughing at her just minutes before were now applauding her with respect and admiration. She could see the changes in their faces, the surprise, the shame, the wonder, and ultimately, the appreciation for what they had just witnessed. The applause reached a crescendo, filling the auditorium with thunderous sound. People were not Just clapping, they were cheering, calling out words of praise and encouragement. The atmosphere had completely transformed from one of cruel mockery to one of celebration and respect. As the standing ovation continued, Lily finally allowed herself to smile. She had done it. She had proven that music truly belonged to anyone who loved it enough to let it live in their heart. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who had witnessed her incredible performance. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, waves of applause crashing over Lily like ocean waves. She sat at the piano bench, still hardly believing what had just happened. Her heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear or embarrassment. It was from pure joy and the incredible rush of having shared her music with the world. Dr. Harrison made his way through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Lily's face. He had seen many talented students over the years, but rarely had he witnessed such a complete transformation of an audience. The same people who had been ready to have this girl removed from the stage were now giving her the kind of ovation usually reserved for professional concert artists. As he climbed the steps to the stage, the applause began to quiet slightly. People sensed that something important was about to happen. Dr. Harrison approached Lily slowly, his expression filled with wonder and respect. When he reached her, he extended his hand to help her stand. "That was absolutely magnificent," he sighed, his voice warm and genuine. "In 30 years of music education, I have rarely heard such a beautiful performance." Lily stood on shaky legs, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing applause. Dr. Harrison turned to address the audience, raising his hand to ask for quiet. The applause gradually faded, but people remained standing, unwilling to sit down and somehow diminish the importance of this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Harrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's excellent acoustics, "we have just witnessed something extraordinary. This young lady has reminded us all of something very important about music and about life itself." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, many of which still showed signs of shock and amazement. "Music doesn't care about your bank account," he continued. "It doesn't care about your designer clothes or your expensive instruments. Music cares only about the passion in your heart and your willingness to work hard to express that passion. This young musician has just demonstrated that talent and dedication can overcome any obstacle." The audience began applauding again, but Dr. Harrison raised his hand to continue. "What's your name, dear?" he asked, turning back to Lily. "Lily Chun," she replied, her voice getting stronger. "Lily Chun," Dr. Harrison repeated, turning back to the audience. "I want everyone to remember that name, because I have a feeling we're going to be hearing great things from her in the future." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was filled with emotion. "Lily, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to attend Riverside Music Academy. Your talent deserves to be nurtured by the best teachers we can provide." The audience erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Chun gasped from her position in the back of the auditorium, her hand flying to her mouth. A scholarship to Riverside Academy was worth tens of thousands of dollars and represented opportunities that she had never dared to dream of for her granddaughter. Lily's eyes filled with tears as the reality of Dr. Harrison's offer sank in. "Really?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Really," Dr. Harrison confirmed with a smile. "Talent like yours should never be wasted due to financial circumstances. We would be honored to have you as part of our academy family." Victoria stepped forward from the crowd, her earlier cruelty replaced by genuine admiration. "I'm sorry," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry for the things I said. You're an amazing musician, and I was wrong to judge you." Preston nodded in agreement, his face red with shame. "We all were," he added. "You're incredible, and we should have seen that instead of being mean." The apology seemed to open a floodgate. Other students began stepping forward to express their regret for their earlier behavior. Parents who had made cruel comments found themselves approaching Mrs. Chun to apologize and congratulate her on having such a talented granddaughter. Mrs. Chun made her way through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. When she reached the stage, Lily ran down the steps and threw herself into her grandmother's arms. They held each other tightly, both crying tears of joy and relief. "I'm so proud of you," Mrs. Chun whispered into Lily's ear. "Your grandfather would have been so proud, too. You did exactly what he always said you could do. You let the music in your heart shine for everyone to see." The woman in the fur coat approached them hesitantly. "I owe you both an apology," she said, her voice sincere. "I said some terrible things and I was completely wrong. Your granddaughter is extraordinarily gifted." Similar scenes were playing out all around the auditorium. People who had been ready to dismiss Lily based on her appearance were now recognizing her remarkable talent. Children who had been laughing were now asking their parents if they could learn to play piano like the girl on stage. A reporter from the local newspaper, who had been covering the showcase as a routine community event, was now frantically taking notes and photos. This was no longer just a story about a school recital. This was a story about talent triumphing over prejudice, about dreams coming true against all odds. Dr. Harrison joined Lily and her grandmother, his smile warm and welcoming. "Mrs. Chun, I understand you work here at the academy. We've always appreciated your dedication, but now I understand where your granddaughter gets her work ethic." Mrs. Chun nodded, still too emotional to speak clearly. "The scholarship covers everything," Dr. Harrison continued. "Tuition, private lessons, even performance opportunities. Lily will have access to all the same resources as our other students, and we'll make sure she gets the support she needs to develop her incredible gift." As the crowd began to disperse, people continued to approach Lily and her grandmother. Music teachers from other schools introduced themselves and offered additional opportunities. Parents exchanged contact information, wanting their children to meet this remarkable young musician. Local music store owners offered discounts on instruments and sheet music, but perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a little girl, one of the youngest students at the academy, tugged on Lily's dress. "Will you teach me to play like that?" she asked with wide, hopeful eyes. Lily knelt down to the little girl's level and smiled. "Practice every day," she said gently. "Even if you don't have a real piano, practice with your heart. Music lives inside you, and if you love it enough, it will find a way to come out." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood that she had just received the most important lesson of her life. As the auditorium finally began to empty, Lily looked back at the piano one more time. Just a few hours ago, it had seemed like an impossible dream to touch those keys. Now it represented the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The girl who had been laughed at for touching the piano had not only silenced her critics, she had inspired an entire auditorium full of people to reconsider their assumptions about talent, worth, and the power of dreams. And in the years to come, whenever students at Riverside Academy felt discouraged or different, they would remember the day when Lily Chun proved that music truly belongs to everyone who has the courage to let it live in their heart. Her story would be told and retold, inspiring countless other young musicians to pursue their dreams regardless of their circumstances. Because sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places, played by hands that have never held anything more valuable than hope and determination.